The ambulance bay doors blew open at 3:47 in the morning, and everyone in Riverside Valley General froze. Not because of the blood. Not because the man on the gurney had the pale, translucent look of someone running on the last of what his body had to give. They froze because of the dog. 90 pounds of Belgian Malinois, tactical vest, still buckled across its chest, moving alongside the gurney with the focused precision of something trained to be exactly where it was. No leash, no handler, just amber eyes sweeping the trauma bay in one slow, deliberate arc, communicating without ambiguity. Come closer and find out what happens next. Dr. Kwan, the attending on call, moved toward the gurney from the left side. She got within arm's reach. The dog's weight shifted forward. A sound came out of its chest that wasn't a bark, wasn't quite a growl, but sat in the space between those two things in a way that made 3 nurses take an involuntary step back. Kwan stopped. The paramedics who'd pushed the gurney through were already pressed against the wall. The charge nurse had one hand on the phone. The trauma tech stood in a loose semicircle, none of them moving, all of them watching the dog instead of the patient. Which was clinically wrong and humanly unavoidable. Nobody reached the patient. That was when the dog turned its head and looked at Rae Solvang. She was standing at the edge of the corridor, which was where she'd ended up when she heard the radio call and walked out of the lab to see what was happening. She was still holding a printed panel result she'd been about to file. The paper was creasing in her grip. The dog held eye contact with her for 4 seconds. Then it stepped back from the gurney, one deliberate pace, and something in its posture shifted, not submission, more like a decision had been made. Rae was moving before she'd consciously decided to move. She heard Kwan say her name. She kept walking. She kept her hands visible, her pace even, her face neutral in the way she'd learned years ago made animals, and people less likely to escalate. When she reached the gurney, she didn't look at the dog first. She looked at the patient. Male, mid-30s. Physically built in a way that came from sustained functional training, the kind that didn't stop when duty did. The bandaging on his left shoulder was soaked through, and whoever had applied it in the field had done it right. Pressure, angle, packing. But the wound had been bleeding for a while before the first hands reached it. His skin was the wrong shade. His breathing was too fast, too shallow. She pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. The dog did not move. Heart rate's elevated about 115, she said to Kwan, to the room. He's compensating, but the window is closing. We need to move him now. The sound of a held breath releasing. Then Kwan was beside her, and the trauma team reformed around the gurney, and the dog moved with them, repositioning with the fluid, economic motion of an animal that had done this before. But it didn't stop them. It watched, it followed, it permitted. Rae kept one hand near the patient's wrist as they moved him into Trauma 1, monitoring his pulse by touch, because the monitors weren't attached yet. She didn't know why she was there instead of back in the lab where she belonged. She only knew that the dog had looked at her and stepped back, and the situation had required someone to move. She was, by training and inclination, the kind of person who moved. His name was on the transport intake. Captain Dylan Seaver. That was all. No next of kin listed, no commanding unit identified. The federal transport team that had called it in was already gone from the bay by the time Kwan asked for them. The dog's collar had a tag, one word stamped in block letters, Knox. While Seaver went into surgery, Knox positioned himself at the base of the surgical suite door and stayed there. Nobody asked him to leave. Nobody tried. Rae went back to the lab, finished filing the panel results she'd crumpled, and sat at her desk under the humming fluorescent light for 11 minutes before 2 people in dark clothing appeared in the lab doorway. One was a woman, late 40s, short-cropped silver hair, with the kind of eye contact that had been professionally calibrated to communicate authority without announcing it. The other was younger, male, with a tablet already open. Rae Solvang. The woman said it like she already knew the answer. Yes. Special Agent Marta Haig, NCIS. She held the badge long enough to confirm it, not long enough to invite scrutiny. The man you just helped stabilize works for us. I need to ask you some questions. They used one of the small consultation rooms on the ground floor, the kind of room with beige walls and a box of tissues, and 2 chairs that had never been comfortable. Rae sat with her hands flat on her knees and answered everything in the order it was asked, which was how she operated under pressure. Systematically, without adding anything that hadn't been requested. Agent Terrell, Haig's partner, took notes on the tablet. He had the habit of looking at the screen rather than at Rae when she spoke, then looking up only when she stopped. She found this precise rather than rude, which told her something about what she was accustomed to. "You were the first person to approach the patient," Haig said. "The dog allowed it." About that, Haig paused in the deliberate way of someone organizing the next sentence carefully. "Knox is a retired military working dog. He's been assigned to Captain Seaver as a service animal for the past 14 months. In that time, he has not accepted contact from an unknown person without prior introduction from Seaver himself. Tonight is the first documented exception." Another pause. "Can I ask about the scar on your right hand?" Rae looked down. The scar was there the way it had been for 6 years. A pale, irregular ridge running across her palm from the base of her index finger to her wrist, with a smaller branch tracking up the inside of her forearm. You could see it when her sleeve slid up, which it had during the transfer. "Accident," she said. Haig looked at her without changing her expression. "What kind?" Rae met her eyes, "The kind that ended my Navy service." Terrell looked up from his tablet. Haig was quiet for 2 seconds, the kind of quiet that meant she was filing information and deciding what to do with it. "You were a Navy corpsman," she said. "Not a question." "For 4 years. And before Riverside Valley, you worked at the Naval Medical Facility in Beaumont. For 8 months after my separation. Your brother." Haig stopped, and something in the way she was holding her voice shifted slightly. "You don't have to confirm anything right now. I just want you to understand why I'm not treating this as coincidence." She closed the folder. "Don't leave the hospital tonight. I'll need you back in this room in 45 minutes. Rae went to the 4th-floor break room, poured coffee she didn't particularly want, and stood at the window and didn't think about Jasper. She thought about the dog instead. Knox had looked at the scar. She was almost certain of that now, reconstructing the moment in the specific involuntary way her brain did with things that mattered, playing it back at half speed. The dog had looked at her hand first, not her face, that one precise second of focus before the posture changed. Jasper was 2 years younger than Rae and had spent 6 years as a Marine military police officer. The last 2 of those years, his unit had worked alongside a military working dog program at the air station outside Corpus Christi. She had visited him there 4 times. Twice she'd been inside the kennel facility. She could still recall the smell of it. Specific, layered, the particular combination of animal and equipment and the trace chemical compounds embedded in the training environment. She'd carried it home in her clothes and hadn't thought about it since. She'd been injured 4 months after her last visit. The blast that scarred her hand had happened during a training exercise, the kind of incident that generated an official report and a medical separation and very little else. Her skin had been repairing itself for 6 years. Apparently, it remembered things she hadn't thought to account for. She was still at the window when she noticed the vehicle on the 3rd level of the parking structure across the street. A dark blue pickup backed into the far corner, angled with a direct sightline to the hospital's east entrance. She couldn't see the plates from here. She noted the make and the angle, and the fact that it had been in the same spot for as long as she'd been standing at this window. She finished her coffee and went back to Seaver's recovery room. He was awake when she arrived, which was faster than anyone had expected for a man 7 hours post-surgery. Knox had relocated from the hallway to the foot of the recovery bed. He tracked Rae's entrance without getting up. "You're the lab tech," Seaver said. His voice was roughened from the intubation. "Hematology. I'm not technically assigned to this floor." "But you're here." "The dog seems to have adopted me." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It didn't quite make it to a smile. "Knox doesn't do that." "I know. Agent Haig told me. Rae checked the IV line on autopilot, adjusted the drip rate. She's running your background. Mine too, probably." "She's good at her job. Tell her the truth when she asks." "I generally do." The scar. His eyes moved to her hand, briefly. I'm not going to ask what happened. It's not a secret. Training exercise. Beaumont facility, 6 years ago. She straightened the tape on the IV site. Your dog smelled the kennel facility on me. I visited my brother there, multiple times. The compounds in the training environment, the equipment, the cleaning agents, they embed in scar tissue in a way that doesn't wash out. She paused. Knox wasn't looking at a stranger. He was looking at someone who smells like someone he knows. Seaver looked at the ceiling for a moment. Your brother. Former Marine MP. He's in a wheelchair now. Different incident, different branch, same general category of outcome. She sat down in the chair beside the bed. He lives in Corpus Christi. I drive down every other weekend. He was quiet in a way that wasn't absence of thought. The specific quiet of someone absorbing information that changed the shape of something they'd already been thinking about. Someone in my unit has been feeding our movement data out, he said finally. His voice was flat, not without feeling, past feeling, settled into something more durable. I reported it, was told I was misreading the pattern. A pause. So I started keeping my own records. How long? 19 months. And the records. Encrypted, secured location. Haig knows they exist. She doesn't know where. He looked at her steadily. Until I know who the leak is, I can't know who to trust. She held his gaze. You're telling me. Knox told me first. It was Silvana, the floor nurse, who flagged her down at the nursing station just after noon. There's a man who's been here twice this morning, Silvana said quietly, glancing toward the end of the hall. He signed in for the East Utility Corridor both times, but Facilities has no work orders on this wing today. I checked the system. Rae looked at the sign-in log. The name written there was Oren Dash, Facilities, extension 3809, signed in at 6:14 a.m. and again at 11:47 a.m., listed both times as routine maintenance inspection. She photographed the page with her phone and called Haig. Don't approach him, Haig said immediately. Don't let him know you've seen the log. Where are you? Nursing station, 4th floor east. Which direction did he go? Recovery wing. A pause 2 seconds, maybe 3. We have a team 4 minutes out. Stay visible, stay at the station, don't give him any reason to change his route. Rae stayed. She watched the corridor. She counted the fluorescent panels on the ceiling. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, she heard Knox. A single sharp vocalization from somewhere down the recovery wing, not a bark, not aggression, the precise sound a trained animal made when a situation crossed a specific threshold. It came through the door clearly, and Rae's hand was on the handle before she'd made a conscious decision. She pushed through into the corridor. The hallway was empty except for a supply cart tipped on its side, contents scattered across the floor. At the far end, the utility closet door was ajar. Through the gap, she could see movement. A man pressed against the shelving, Knox positioned between him and the exit, not attacking, not retreating. Just present in the way that made retreat impossible. Then the stairwell door opened behind her, and Haig came through it at a run with 2 agents behind her. Oren Dash was 41 years old, a 9-year facilities employee with clean performance reviews and no prior record. He was also, as it emerged over the following 2 hours, in regular contact with a burner number registered to a logistics consulting firm that Haig's unit had been tracking for 7 months. He hadn't touched Seaver. He'd been accessing the medication administration logs, specifically the projected discharge timeline and the mobility assessment notes. Someone wanted to know exactly when Seaver would be ambulatory enough to move and vulnerable enough to be moved without resistance. The vendor contractor's name was Galt. He worked IT support for 3 regional hospital systems and had valid access credentials at Riverside Valley General going back 19 months, long before Seaver had arrived. He'd run a remote query on the patient floor assignments at 1:22 p.m., 40 minutes after Dash's arrest. Rae found out because she was the one who noticed the supply coordinator's office had been accessed. The supply coordinator had called in sick that morning. She told Haig. Haig's team swept the office and found the terminal still warm, a query log showing 2 searches in the previous hour, one for patient room assignments, one for nursing staff on extended shifts. Rae's name appeared in the second search. She was flagged as anomalous, a lab tech who had been on the floor for over 12 hours, informally assigned to a patient outside her clinical scope. Someone was building a picture of who was maintaining continuity with Seaver's care. They moved him to a room on the 3rd floor, logged under a different identifier, with Silvana's badge listed as the assigned nurse to break the staffing trail. It wasn't a clean solution. It was the one they had in the time they had to make it. The text arrived at 5:51 a.m. from a number she didn't recognize. "We know you've been talking to them. Step back or this gets complicated for you." She looked at it for a long time. Then she forwarded it to Haig, walked back to Seaver's room, and showed it to him. He read it once. Something moved through his expression. Cold and contained, the kind of anger that had already burned at some earlier point, and what remained now was quieter and more durable. "They're not planning to follow through on that," he said. "I know. They're trying to make you hesitate." She looked at the message again. Step back. She thought about every version of that instruction she'd received in the past 6 years. The supervisor who told her the lab was functioning fine, and her instincts were probably calibrated for a different environment. The attending who said she was technically excellent but needed to stay in her lane. The administrator who thanked her for flagging a billing discrepancy and stopped returning her calls. Step back. Be smaller. What you think you see probably isn't what you think it is. "I'm not going to," she said. She put the phone in her pocket. Knox, from the foot of the bed, rested his chin on his paws and kept his eyes on the door. At 5:58 a.m., Haig sent a voice memo. Rae put in one earbud and listened to it standing in the corridor outside Seaver's room. The civilian contractor who had been coordinating Dash and Galt had been in Kirby for the past 48 hours, not a hotel. A short-term rental with a direct sightline to the east entrance of Riverside Valley General. His name was Aldous Priam, former defense infrastructure analyst, DoD adjacent, 8 years in private consulting, after a career that generated exactly the kind of professional biography that looked thorough until you started verifying the specifics. He had been monitoring Seaver. He had also, according to the phone metadata pulled from Galt's laptop, been monitoring Rae. Specifically, her arrival and departure times from the lab cross-referenced against her proximity to Seaver's room. They had built a picture of her, not as a threat, as an obstacle they hadn't anticipated and were deciding how to address. She removed the earbud and went back into Seaver's room. "Someone outside has been watching me for 48 hours. His face didn't change in any visible way. What was underneath it did. Where? She described the building. He pulled up a map on his secured phone and turned the screen toward her. She recognized it, a mid-rise office complex on Whitmore Boulevard, 2 miles east, 3 floors of specialist practices, a 4th floor that had been listed as vacant on the signage she passed every morning at the light by the on-ramp. Vacant, or arranged to appear that way. She called Haig. "Are you executing?" 6 minutes from now, Haig said, simultaneously with a second warrant. "The leak in Seaver's unit. We have the name. He coordinated with Priam's network starting 19 months ago. A pause calibrated. Sergeant Bowie Kreff. He's at Fort Sam right now." Seaver was watching her face. She kept her expression even. "The encrypted drive," Rae said. "You need it before 0600. Already on the way to it. Seaver told us the location 30 seconds ago." She looked at him. He nodded. Barely, the small movement of a man who had decided the risk of sharing was now smaller than the risk of not sharing, and had acted on that arithmetic before she'd even walked back into the room. Seaver made it upright with one hand on the IV pole and the particular set of his jaw that meant pain was being managed through decision rather than chemistry. Rae didn't comment on this. He didn't ask her to. The storage room off the 3rd floor west wing was 4 feet wide and smelled of industrial detergent and latex. She'd chosen it because it locked from inside and had no window visible from the corridor, and because if the next 8 minutes went the wrong direction, Seaver's surgical repair couldn't afford a physical confrontation. Knox had cleared the door first, the way he cleared every door, ahead, quick, decisive. Now all 3 of them were in the dark. The freight elevator engaged at 5:58 a.m. The sound of it came through the wall with the kind of clarity that hospital construction never quite accounted for. Cables, mechanism, the acoustic signature of a car in motion in an enclosed shaft. Rae counted seconds without meaning to. Seaver's hand found her wrist in the dark, not gripping, just contact. The involuntary acknowledgement of two people who had collectively run out of things they could control and were now waiting for someone else to finish the work. Footsteps, one person, moving along the wall rather than the center of the hall. The door handle moved, met the resistance of the lock, stopped. A pause, long enough that she was aware of her own heartbeat, of Knox perfectly still beneath her hand. Then the footsteps moved on. 20 seconds later, from the far end of the corridor, multiple sets of feet moving fast. The specific cadence of people who moved through confined spaces as a professional function. Haig's voice, close and sharp, "Federal agents, don't move." A sound that might have been something hitting the floor. Then voices, controlled, transactional, the efficient vocabulary of an arrest executed by people who'd practiced it and didn't need the performance of it. When the door opened from outside, it was Haig. She looked at the IV pole, at the dark, at Knox sitting calmly between Rae and the exit, and something crossed her face that she controlled quickly but not quite fast enough. "It's clear," she said. "The drive checked out. The documentation matches Golt's account at every intersection point." She looked at Seaver. "There's a recording." "Two," he said. "I heard both." Her voice shifted, not softer but different. The layer of professional distance dropped, not all the way, but enough. The second one names a contact above Kref in the chain. Priam is in custody. Kref is in custody. Simultaneous 30 seconds ago. Seaver looked at the wall. Something moved through his expression that wasn't grief exactly, and wasn't quite betrayal either. Something older than both. The particular expression of a man who had known for a long time that the answer was going to be bad, and had built a case specifically to make that answer irrevocable, and was now sitting with the fact that no amount of preparation made the confirmation cost less. Rae didn't offer him anything about it. Some things didn't have a useful response. You let them be what they were, and you didn't try to manage it for someone else. The federal indictments were unsealed 4 months later. Rae read the DOD statement on her lunch break in her new office, a small room on the second floor of Riverside Valley General, with a window facing the east parking structure, which was fitting in a way she'd stopped being surprised by. The room belonged to the Military Civilian Emergency Coordination Program, which had been in conceptual development for 2 years and had, in the months following that April morning, received the kind of institutional momentum that came from specific events making specific gaps impossible to ignore. Rae's role was protocol development. Specifically, the gap that existed when military patients came through civilian trauma systems without adequate contextual briefing for the receiving staff. The gap that had been open in that trauma bay at 3:47 a.m., before Knox had looked at a scarred palm and made a different assessment than the room had been designed to produce. It was detailed work. Most of it happened at a whiteboard. None of it was dramatic. She was at the whiteboard when Seaver appeared in the doorway. Civilian clothes, moving well, carrying the left side with the body's learned caution around a repair that had held but still remembered. Knox was with him, service vest on, sitting at parade rest the moment they stopped. "You look better," she said. "You haven't eaten lunch yet," he said. "It's 2 p.m. That's not the same as a yes. She capped the marker. There was something almost absurd about being called out for skipping lunch by a man who had taken a round through his shoulder less than half a year ago. But the absurdity was the comfortable kind. The kind you earned by going through something with a person and coming out the other side, still capable of being mildly exasperated by them. He crossed the room and looked at the whiteboard. The current section was titled K-9 Assisted Medical Assessment, Staff Preparation and Recognition Protocols. "Specific experience to draw from," she said. "I can see that." He turned. He had an envelope in his hand, standard white, unaddressed. He held it out. "Haig wanted you to have this. Official commendation. Your contributions are documented at the federal level, not public. But anyone with the clearance to look will find it, and what they'll find is complete." She took the envelope and held it without opening it. She thought about what it contained, not the paper itself, but the fact of it. The formal record. The institutional acknowledgement from people with the authority to make that acknowledgement means something real. She had spent 4 years at this hospital being excellent at a job that most people didn't think of as excellence. Running panels, catching anomalies, flagging things that turned out to matter in a room below ground level where nobody came unless they needed results. She had spent 4 years before that in the Navy learning things about emergency medicine and the human body under duress that most of her current colleagues hadn't encountered until their 3rd clinical rotation. She had not moved toward that gurney at 3:47 a.m. to prove any of this. She had moved because there was a man who was dying and a dog that had made a decision, and the situation required someone to act. That, as it turned out, was the whole of it. "Thank you," she said. "I'll take it. I'm glad it exists." She set the envelope on her desk, but I would have done every part of it without it. Seaver looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "That's actually the point." Knox pressed his weight against her left leg. Easy, deliberate, the simple animal decision to lean into something he had determined was solid. Rae felt it through her slacks and didn't move away from it. She picked up a different marker and turned back to the whiteboard. There was still a lot to build, and she had learned a long time ago that building was exactly what she was here for.